All right. Would you like to start introductions, Kelly, or should I start?
You can start.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, whether you're joining us today, listening in, or if you're watching it at a future date time. We're so glad that you came to listen to us talk about research a little bit. We're hoping that this will be a fun and casual platform for those interested in hearing about what research is like in occupational therapy, or if maybe you have an interest in considering a career in research and you want to learn a little bit more about it. We hope that this First Fridays for OT Research platform will be a way for anybody to join in whenever you have a question, concern, or really anything about what research might look like in our profession in rehabilitation. You have anything to add to that, Kelly?
I don't. I think you captured it well. So we're glad to have you here as we kick this off.
Maybe we should introduce ourselves too. Forgot about that part.
So I'm Kelly Harris. I'm faculty in the program in occupational therapy. My background's in education and actually in speech language pathology. I'm a clinical speech language pathologist, and my work is in examining the impact of chronic diseases, specifically asthma and sickle cell disease, on developmental and educational outcomes.
My name is Catherine Hoyt. I'm faculty at Washington University in St. Louis as well. And my area of focus for research is looking at early identification of developmental delay. So I did my OTD looking at cognitive deficits in young children with sickle cell disease, and my PhD identifying early signs of motor delay in children with cerebral palsy. And my current research has transitioned back to sickle cell disease. And right now we're just hoping to be here for this series for you. So please let us know what questions you have. And we're excited today to welcome Dr. Nardos to talk about his experiences with how he came to research and what that path looked like, and why research might be a career for you, or maybe why not. We know that those decisions can come at different stages in life. And even once you pursue a research degree, you might even make different decisions after that as well. So with that in mind, I guess for those that are joining us live, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, or raise your hand, or just unmute and let us know. I think we can get started with our first prompt here. What do you think, Kelly?
I think so.
You want me to say a few words about who I am?
Yeah. Kelly Moses.
Well, yeah, just about who you are, because our first question, we'll get into that a little bit. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
Then I'll ask the question.
That's okay. Go ahead and talk. If you want to talk about your current, what you're doing right now.
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. I have just accepted a new position, but it hasn't been officially announced yet, so I can't speak on it. So right now, officially, I am a postdoctoral scientist that works at Oregon Health and Sciences University. And I work in a lab that's interested in understanding what goes on in the brains of people that have chronic pain. All these weird chronic pains that you hear about, fibromyalgia, and all other kind of body aches and pains that are not easily explainable, like other kinds of pain. Like if I burn your hands, I know what happens. The chronic pain, we just don't. And we're trying to understand that using functional neuroimaging. So we bring you in, we scan your brain while we expose you to stimuli that may be painful to you. And I can, in the interest of time, I won't go too much into this, but so we're trying to understand the basis of chronic pain in the brain. My previous background, when I was here at Washington University, which is where I got my PhD in neuroscience, I was interested in understanding how the young adult brain, the brains of people like you and I, hears a new word, let's say in a new language maybe, and makes sense of it. How do we learn new words? You might think that most of new word learning happens in childhood, which is true when you learn your first language. But I was interested in understanding how that happens in a young adult brain. And I also did some experiments to try to teach people some new words. And I scanned their brains before and after they learned stuff to try to see what happened in their brain. that's my background, and I will let you guys ask questions.
So the first question, thank you for sharing that little, intro about kind of what you're doing now. But we're interested in just hearing a little bit about your story. What brought you to research? So can you tell us just a little about your story of how you got to that point?
I think my interest in research started probably when I started speaking. When I was a kid, so I come from a family of teachers. My dad is a professor, and he taught educators. He taught teachers how to teach. And my mom was a teacher, and that's actually how they met at the job, And I was their son, and since I was 5, I just had a very inquisitive mind. I wanted to know how things worked, and I had just a million questions. What's that thing hanging in the sun? How does it work? Why does it keep rotating? Just questions. And that's what research is you trying to make sense of some question that you have. And how do you answer that question? How do you go about, where do you start? So if you're interested in something in occupational therapy and understanding why or how a person can get to some sort of rehabilitated state, you form some question. Okay, if I do this, if I do that, and then how do you form the ideas that are good research ideas and bad research ideas? What have other people done before? You're clearly not the first person to have thought about this. And how do you make sense of it, and then arrive at some way of understanding what it is that you think you care about? And we do this all the time, I think, in life. And I was lucky enough to get into a program, a neuroscience graduate program, that paid me to think like this, to ask these sorts of research questions. And my question at the time was, how do we understand how the brain makes sense of word meanings? But my background is I came from Ethiopia. That's where I was born. I came to this country in 2000, and I went a whole bunch of different ways. Neuroscience came much later for me. I went to a school called Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. If you ever heard of Amish people, I got to meet some Amish people there. I studied computer science and economics when I was there, and my computer science background is what led to me getting a research technician job here at WashU in a lab that at the time was interested in understanding recovery from stroke. And they hired me as a tech, and I did the computer stuff, but I also got interested in the brain and how it all works. And I became the person that helped design some of the experiments. In this case, was after stroke. Some of the subjects that we had were they had aphasias, different types of aphasias, and we were trying to understand how. At the time, I was working for Dr. Connor. She had this idea called constraint-induced therapy. You guys may have heard of it in OT. The idea is to, whatever aspect of language is impaired in these people, let's try to see if we can, constrain other parts of their mind so that they can focus on this impaired kind of state, see if we can rehab them in that way. And this came from motor therapy. Like if I hurt my arm, I choose not to use it, usually because it's weaker. But if I constrain my other arm and force me to use it, I might maybe recover quicker. It's kind of the idea, the hypothesis. So that's what led to who I am now. I started taking classes, neuroscience and biology classes. Like I said, my background was economics and computer science. So I had to take a bunch of the sciencey stuff on the side while I was working. And I did that. A few years later, I got into grad school, finished grad school. Took me a while. Took me 6.5 years to get through it. It varies, some people finished in 4. And I was like, what am I still doing here? So we finished, we're here now, and yeah, so that's who I am.
Excellent, thank you.
I was muted. I was just going to say, I know, Dr. Harris, you had a little bit of an interesting path to research, and I saw one of the questions here in the chat. What motivated, I think you might be good to answer this, what motivated you to pursue a PhD and come back from a clinical world to getting that degree?
Yeah, I'll answer that really quickly. And we can jump back in. So I'm a clinical speech pathologist, and I worked with both adults and then children for several years. And I knew, like, when I was getting my master's, that I want to do something else. I just not sure where it's going to go. Like, I'm going to want to extend this somehow. But I think in my work, I mean, the ultimate thing that brought me back was seeing kind of underlying problems, root issues that therapy wasn't really able to address, that research really needed to start to examine. And so I felt less effective than I would like to be, because I had these questions that I felt like needed to be answered first. So that's really what it was. I think I just kind of, in my work, was not frustrated with the work, but frustrated with seeing these kind of bigger challenges and underlying problems that my field, specifically in that clinical work, wasn't really addressing. So yeah.
I feel like I had a similar experience too, like thinking about that, like having been a clinical OT for 5 years. And then when I couldn't decide actually. I was having a really hard time deciding whether I wanted to come back for a PhD, knowing that it would change the trajectory of my career forever. So really, once you have that PhD, you're trained to do more than your clinical work. You're trained to ask questions in a way that you can answer them, to learn more about what we're doing as therapists. And that was really a tough decision. And one of the best bits of advice that I got from Allison King, actually, at WashU. She said to me, like, don't do your PhD until there's something you care so much about that you don't mind waking up in the morning thinking about it, and you're thinking about it all the time as you're going to sleep. And I would say maybe I started the PhD even a little too soon, because when I first started, that first year is tough. And knowing that reason why you are doing it, why you are coming back to school and spending so many hours and stress and sleep, towards this idea. When you care enough about that outcome, I think that's what drives it. Like what Kelly was saying, I was seeing things as a clinician that I wanted to change, but nobody would make those changes without the evidence to support it. They're not going to change how clinical practice is done, what the interventions that are done, or maybe even the way that we structure our days, unless we can say there's, a financial reason or a reason that'll help the child to do that. So that's what drove me to come back, was that I really love being an OT so much. I think it is just so much fun. I love being a clinician, and I want our profession to continue to thrive and exist, but we need the evidence to do that. Actually, so maybe added on to that before we move on to the next question, Dr. Nardos or Harris, in the chat, there is this comment, like, what's the difference between a PhD and other types of research degrees? I know the three of us all have PhDs, but if you have any thoughts about that. Anybody?
All right, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. The only thing the first thing that comes to mind is the freedom, right? There's less restrictions when you're getting your PhD, as in, you're not rushed to finish this project. There's no deadline. I kind of like that, because if you're working, let's say, for a company, I don't know, some biotech firm, there's deadlines. Like, you have to, because people have to eat. The shareholders are going to ask, where are the results? So there's deadlines for you to produce some result. And usually those results are, they're kind of dictated. They have a story to want to tell, you know what I mean? But a PhD itself is so to me, I had a question, I got in there, and I had guides. I had, my committee and my professor that made sure I was asking the right questions to answer this, to get an idea of what I was concerned about. But the outcome almost didn't matter. Like, any finding was a good finding. You'd learn something in the process. It's not So I learned statistics in the process. I learned so many different tools, programming, how to think, in life. You know, dangerous. Some people like structure. Like some people are, they need to, okay, you finish in 4 years, year one, you have to do this, year two. And if you don't have that structure, people will get lost. Um, you got to figure out which type of person you are when you get into a PhD. So that to me is a difference, right? Is the structure is not there in a PhD. Like you make the structure yourself, which is very hard because how do you measure how well you're doing, right? Is it the number of papers you publish? Is it because in grad school I got in, okay, the first year, at the end of the first year, you have this qualifying exam in which you come up with a research idea, you develop it, you write a paper on it, and then you present it to a group of people. And then once you pass that qualifying exam, they say, oh, okay, this guy is ready to be able to pursue his own research PhD question. Then for the next 4 years, you have this question and you just work it. And you have very little feedback on how well you're doing. Like you have these committee meetings and you give them updates. Hey, I collected this many subjects, but there's nobody telling you like, am I good? Am I doing well? Like, am I going to get a job after this? It was very hard, and so I, in retrospect, I wish I had gotten into the PhD with some idea, some structure in my head. Okay, by year two, I would have liked to accomplish publishing one paper. Or by year three, I would have liked me. I just got in there and I swam across and I made it. So that to me is a difference between the PhD world and some other more structured worlds, which I know very little about.
I think, too, I would add, I think you hit on a really important piece, right? That kind of difference between, I would say, a terminal and non-terminal degree is that terminal degree, you're asking questions and everything else before that, you're answering them, right? Somebody else is giving you a question and you're seeking an answer. Whereas that terminal degree, you're really doing the question development and, hopefully learning or having learned to, are you asking the right question, right? And how do you identify that right question? So I think just in line with what Dr. Nardos was saying, I think that's an important distinction. But I think to the question about, a PhD in one field versus another. So as I said, I'm a clinical speech pathologist. My PhD is in education and I'm faculty in the occupational therapy program, right? And so my PhD is in education, but I have concentrations in public health and development overall, because that was kind of my background in with speech pathology, but then also American culture studies. So my work really sits at this nexus of, kind of public health, environmental concerns. The built environment is very interesting to me, and looking at the impact of the built environment, and then also on these kind of educational and communication and participation outcomes. So I say that to say, my PhD is not in occupational therapy, but my work still is very rooted in this department, in this program, if that makes sense. And so my PhD is in education. So I think that, yeah, you want to pick the right area based on what you're interested in and that question that you have, or, and we're always kind of refining those questions, right? But that doesn't, mean you can only walk one path and research down the line. You get your PhD and you can almost do whatever you want with it because, you have the tools to acquire knowledge in other areas, right? And so some of that has to be structured or formal knowledge, but in other cases it doesn't. I mean, we could take classes forever, but that's not necessary to gain the actual knowledge and tools we need.
So I want to stress that point you just made, which is my background is also in neuroscience, not in occupational therapy, but yet here we are, right? And you're from education, and somehow we're transferring that to this field, or hoping to.
Yeah. It's the way the world is going, right? So I think one of the original questions that maybe Haley you asked was kind of about multidisciplinary work that's happening, and I think most people, that's what we're looking at. How do we come together to collaborate? and really create multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary projects. Because honestly, when we're thinking about making, change in the world and whatever population of interest to us, people are not, you know, people are multidisciplinary, right? There are multiple facets, and so the work that we do has to really address that. And so we can live in our little narrow lanes and worlds, but we won't be as effective. So it's my 2 cents.
It's a really good point, actually, that I was just thinking about that and realizing like, oh, hey, the three of us that are here, I'm the only one that's an OT, but we're talking about OT research. And I think what is so cool about that is that occupational therapy really is a field that's working with individuals to do the things that they want and need to do in their everyday lives. But what they want and need to do is related to literally everything that we can imagine. And so how do we get people to do what they want and need to do? And that has to do with education, with speech and communication, and how the brain is working. So really what I hope we're able to answer is that as we think about occupational therapy and rehabilitation science and occupational science and all the words that are being thrown out there for how we describe the science of occupational therapy, it relates to everything. So when you're thinking about if a research career is right for me, it's really about kind of what Dr. Nardos was talking about a little bit ago, about identifying those questions that are meaningful to you, and then thinking about what is the field that aligns with that question, because it might not be directly in OT, but you might go learn it somewhere else and then come and bring it back, or maybe you'll bring OT to them, which is also a wonderful thing to do.
That's what I'm saying.
There's
Maybe
a
it's
risk.
OT
There
with a
is a risk.
specialization somewhere. I'm sorry, did I cut you off? Yeah.
No, please. I was just joking. As I was going to say, the risk is you can't stop your brain from asking the questions. There's too many questions.
Yeah. The difference is, I think, though, you have like the space and time to go answer, right? Like when I was a clinician and asking these questions, I had to go work. I couldn't, like I didn't have the time to really give that any mental energy, whereas now I do. But I think we have.
That's a
Go
blessing.
ahead. Yeah, it is. I agree. We have one more question, but then we definitely want to see if you guys have any additional questions. I think the last question we want to ask is just, what were you most concerned about as you made the jump? And you touched on that a little bit, Dr. Nardos, in saying the things that were challenging or that, maybe were hard or fearful, but like what were the concerns thinking about pursuing a PhD program? You too, Dr. Hoyt.
I'll say first for me, so the challenges while I was, or before pursuing, I don't think I wouldn't call them a challenge, but before getting into the program, like I said earlier, I really didn't give it much thought. Most people are like my sister, are the type of people that like to plan and outline, and this is the plan, this is what I'm gonna do. I wasn't like that. I just kind of, grad school. My, brother-in-law at the time was like, hey, you seem to be interested in this. Maybe you should try this thing out. Because he was a grad student at the time. It's like, oh, this seems cool. I like your lifestyle, I was like, let me do it. So that's how I got into it, So getting in wasn't a challenge. While I was in it, I told you some of the challenges, like getting the, how well am I doing part was tough. Getting assessing how your progress was tough. That was a challenge. I was lucky enough that I didn't have these challenges, which are things like not getting along with their mentor. Like it's a big deal picking the right mentor. I had friends that had very rough times. The lab that you pick to get into it's like a marriage. You have that person you work with is your mentor, your everything, so you have to make sure to pick the right one when you get in.
That is solid advice, Dr. Nardo.
Yeah, and I was lucky enough I didn't have that issue, and I was also lucky enough to not just have one mentor, right? So I had kind of multiple, which is also a good thing for you to try to do if you can, if you go down that path, spread your wings. But those challenges were they were, I went through them. They weren't really that tough. The biggest one for me was as I was getting close to the end is what am I going to do with this?
Mhm.
And if I choose to go down the strictly research path and try to go to an institution where I have to generate my own research dollars and money, I didn't want that lifestyle because it's at least in the neuroscience world, I saw the lifestyle that people that have to generate their own money live, and it's it's not easy, especially if you're not fully into it because you're working 80, 90 hours a week sometimes to try to get the money and generating the money writing grants takes up a lot of time for them, compared to the time you spend actually doing the research. And I said, I mean, I like doing the research, but I don't want to spend my time trying to chase dollars. And I said, I don't want it. So I decided I didn't want that research intensive sort of route. And I've been chasing opportunities to try to teach, since then. And for me, it was tough because the institution that I went to Washington University and their focus, their training was in try to produce researchers, right? People that would go chase the money, get the grant dollars, and you become a researcher with a research question and stuff. Not teachers. It's not the program is not set up to produce teachers. So if you want to be a teacher, you have to go out of your way to try to guest lecture in a certain class, go to a teaching center to try to get resources of how to write a teaching philosophy statement. You have to do the work yourself. And as a postdoc too, that kind of was what I had to do because as a postdoc, my job was to again be a researcher. That was my primary, duty. But thankfully, I lucked out. I got into a lab that not only allowed me to devote time to teach in neighboring institutions, but also do a lot of community outreach. I one thing I really developed later on was I cared about sharing what I know, this neuroscience world, this teaching world, this who I am, to people that come from backgrounds that are typical in this world. I want to bring in the most atypical, underrepresented minorities into this field because they're just not there. They're not represented. If you talk about research and let's say some ailment, let's say sickle cell you brought up, Catherine, it's a disease that primarily affects Black people. If it's a disease that affects Black people, it would be nice if it was Black people doing the research. You know what I mean? Because those people will have the kind of questions that maybe, Catherine might not, because those people have family members that have does, that kind of stuff. So I care deeply about like sharing this world to the world that it's that, I think you guys get the idea of what I mean. And I had a chance to do that in the past 4 or 5 years and really care about what it means to, okay, be a neuroscientist. Fine, I'm a neuroscientist. Now what do I do with it? You know, I have to somehow give back to the community somehow, somewhere. How do I connect back? Teaching I found was one way, to talk to people like you. It's big power to try to reach youngsters, coming up, be like, hey, this is how I was, and you guys can do it too. It's a big deal, especially since I'm Black, Black kids can now see, hey, Barack Obama, the biggest thing that he did, even though I don't agree with everything that he did, is he was a Black dude. And he showed that it's possible if you're Black to get up top. So that's what we try to do every day. I kind of geared away from research here. Uh,
That's okay.
yeah,
I
yeah.
do. I think you made some really excellent points, though, Dr. Nardos, about a lot of different topics related to increasing diversity and representation in research and higher education and how important that is. But then also that those concerns jumping from other careers to research can take place at many different stages, whether that's deciding, whether you had difficulty deciding, or during the education process. And you touched on so many different things that I think are so important for people considering a path in research to consider, like what is that ultimate purpose and how do you pick what lab to be in or what your research questions should be. I know for me, actually, as I was listening to you talk, I was the opposite. It was hard for me to decide to make that jump. I was nervous. I was
Which,
nervous.
I'm sorry, which jump?
Like from my previous job, I was a clinician for 5 years to pursuing a PhD and doing research. That switch was hard for me because
Why?
I didn't think I was smart enough, if I'm really honest. I
Me
didn't think
too. Me
that
too.
I really didn't think that I could do it. I know I have the OTD, but like that actually, I intended to do a clinical master's in OT. I didn't think I was smart enough for the OTD and ended up doing that. And I didn't think I was capable of finishing a PhD.
You
And then
know,
once
I had the same problems because for me, I didn't have the biology kind of background. I came from economics and computer science. How the hell am I going to make it in this brain world? I wasn't, yeah, sorry to cut you off, but go ahead. I can relate to that.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Nardos. I think people often feel isolated in those feelings, and it can be very intimidating then to apply or to ask the questions if you're not sure if you are prepared. But I feel like I want to tell all the OTs that I know that you're prepared. I know that you are, and I know that you have important questions to ask. It's just finding the mentor that can help guide you through that matches your mentorship needs. So Dr. Harris, there was a question in the chat for you.
Yeah.
Did you see it? Do you want to just go
Yeah.
ahead?
I'll just read it. That concern about academic research careers. One concern is the rejection and burnout related to things like funding. So how do I manage those challenges? So, I'll say a couple of things about that. As I mentioned, I was in an education program, and education does not work in the same way that medical schools do in terms of the stress and pressure around funding, right? I did not see my life here when I started that program, that this was not what I envisioned, right? And I had a mentor and advisor who encouraged me to, no, you should be looking for medical school. That is, bringing education and kind of merging that education and public health in that setting is what's good. And I was really fearful of that. And I think at the same time, so when I came back to school, I was married with 2 children. And so one concern I had was money. I think, if I'm just being honest, like going back to school, am I going to be able to, maintain my lifestyle was a concern. But then thinking about coming into this type of position, my kids are they're, at these ages that time is important. And I think priorities are key. So I prioritize my life in a way that, a work family, like a work family balance is critical to me, and I'm maintaining that. And my research, I'm not going to let completely die, but it does not get to win every battle. Simple as that, right? Like, and I think really maintaining kind of my mental health and all of those things help me to have a healthy, to dictate what I see as a healthy research productivity, right? And to make sure that I'm in a program that agrees with that perspective, that aligns well with, what works for me, right? So I wouldn't go into a program that is not friendly to families, that does not, support that kind of prioritization, right? And that really expects me to just be a workhorse and nothing else, right? So I think it's really thinking about what you value, what your priorities are, and making sure that that is the type of position you're looking for and the type of work that you're looking to do, if that makes sense. I think that, this is part of the culture that we all have to kind of work together to continue to change. Because I think it's a culture and a climate that is not healthy sometimes. And we have to just kind of continue to push that needle a little bit. So yeah, that's for me. I am very kind of aware and mindful of the burnout and the balance and keeping that balance. In terms of rejection, don't take it personal. That's the best, for me, that's what it comes down to, right? Like recognizing that rejection is far more common than acceptance in general, but that doesn't mean that nothing you submit gets accepted, right? It means that it's an opportunity to make it better. It means that for whatever reason, that wasn't a good fit. And so what's the next thing, or how do I work on this to make it better? And when I kind of changed my frame to think about it in that way, it was really helpful. I had a mentor sit down with me with it wasn't a rejection for a manuscript, but it was like heavy edits, right? And I have kind of come to understand that, like, if I don't get heavy edits on something, I don't feel like, did you read it?
Dr. Harris, why do you have to keep reminding me of my rejected manuscripts?
But no, yeah, so I don't know.
I think it's the reframing of the rejections, that it's not a rejection of you, as a person. It's a rejection of saying this isn't the right grant or this isn't the right paper for this agency at this time. It doesn't mean it's a bad idea either. I'm not going to say that it gets easier though. I feel like still I get like a rejection on a paper manuscript and I feel personally assaulted that like, I love what I'm doing. I care so much about this. Why don't you care about it? I feel that you should, and I'm not sure why you don't. So it does still hurt, I think, for me anyways. But it gets easier.
Yeah, I agree. It does. I mean, yeah, it still stings. Yeah. To your point, Bridget, about thinking about money, I mean, I think that I was very cautious and thought about that. And so when you look at programs, you want to know what the opportunities are, what you can apply for extra, are there fellowships, extra sponsorships? What do the stipends look like? How much I worked throughout my PhD program, and I worked more than I should have, but which is not necessarily the right answer either, right? But like figuring out what works for you, I would say.
And asking the programs and other people in current programs, if you're at that stage of like really thinking about it, do current students work? I know for me in my program, we were advised not to work at all outside in the first year. And then after that, I was advised like 6 to 10 hours would be acceptable. And I know a lot of clinical rehab programs, they allow PhD students to continue working in some way because you're also a clinician and it can bring in some extra money, but also, then the amount of hours. So is that good for you in other realms of life too? I know some people pay for PhDs. Sorry, Dr. Harris.
I just going to say, be realistic about the type of student that you are, right?
Yeah.
For some of us, working is a bad idea. And for others, you can make it work. I think you have to be realistic about what, be honest with yourself about who you are and what you are willing to do.
Right. Yeah. I'm actually a PT, and my sister is a PT, and she told me about this because I've been really, and that's how I heard about this. She went to WashU, and I really wanted to kind of hear your guys' perspective on it as a working mom. Like I've always wanted to kind of go back and do my own research. I'm involved in research a little bit at Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, but just trying to figure out how I can maybe work a little bit and do the research at the same time. So that's where I'm at right now. And I love hearing your guys' like candid, realistic, real perspectives. It's so helpful for me. So thank you for sharing everything today.
See if you can combine the two. Like you said,
That's
you're
what I'm
working right now.
thinking. Yeah.
And see if you can apply research to what you're doing.
Well, what I'm thinking is, so one of the researcher, so I'm actually in a master's of health services and outcomes research program at Northwestern. And so I'm like, okay, this master's is teaching me the research skills that I need, but at the same time, in the PT OT world, for some reason, my research boss is a research PhD, PT PhD, and she seems to think that if you ever want to teach or you ever want to do clinical research, like you need to have a PhD as a PT. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. Like you just need this research skills. But for some reason in the OT and PT profession, I feel like it's this sort of unspoken like requirement. But at the same time, the NIH has clinical tracks that MDs do, and they don't have PhDs sometimes. And they go on this clinical research track, and then the NIH has the PhD track. So that to me is like confusing. And, with the money thing, I'm still trying to figure that out. But I'm thinking I could maybe try to convince my organization to let me work the 20 hours, but because that's what I'm doing now is 50-50. And then the other 50% is research time, but really it's me getting my PhD time. And then with that stipend, the research stipend. So that's how I'm thinking it might work, but that is going to be so tough. And I like you said, Kelly or Dr. Harris, is that it's really important for me to like recognize that I'm not going to be the straight A student that I normally am, and that's okay. But that's so hard for me to say, you know, as a mom and working, like, how am I going to do that? So those are the things that are on my mind. And any thoughts from you guys?
I would just add the one thing, and I think Dr. Reynolds touched on this, but just because somebody else finishes a program in 4 years doesn't mean that's what you have to do.
Right.
Or 5 years, or like, don't make
Mhm.
every other people your measuring stick, right? Just
Yeah.
because this person with no children is a straight A student, did you learn the material? Are you competent in it? Did you pass? Yes. But like,
Mhm.
I mean, I think some of those details you have to prioritize.
Right. I agree. And I think that's sort of just a life lesson in general that, you know, as I'm going through, even just taking master's classes right now and using my tuition reimbursement benefits at my organization, I'm kind of chipping away at it here and there and doing it at my own pace. And I think that's totally fine for me right now. And, but now I'm trying to think about what the next steps are and what that might look like, and being okay with it, right? That all personal growth thing too, I think. But
And
I just
I
want to,
I
oh,
have I have I have a kind of a quick one. And is it really true that getting a PhD is really the only way that you can do research? I don't think that's the case.
no.
Because like with our OTD programs, right? They're so you're already a PT, right?
Yeah, I'm a DPT, and yeah, and I have a specialty in neurologic clinical specialties. So
So what would it look like, you know, if you, for instance, was to come into our PT or our OT program, like where would we place her?
I think the problem is
Yeah,
from my understanding, correct me if
yeah.
I'm wrong, you guys, you know, I'm up here at Northwestern in Chicago, so, and know this world up here, but it seems like I would not be allowed like tenure track and things like that, and that's kind of the pushback and the negative piece of it. But like, do I really need tenure track right now? That's pretty much, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
no, but what I
Like,
mean
I
is
don't know.
for you to try to get
Yeah,
exposure to research, right? So if you
right.
attended the doctoral, physical therapy or doctoral occupational therapy program,
Hmm.
she would be able to do that, right? To do research. And am I wrong?
so Dr. Nardos,
Yeah.
so just a couple of things. I want to make sure that we're respectful of everybody's afternoons so that we tie things up. So I'm gonna answer
Okay.
another question, but also, so our talk in August is going to focus on the different types of degrees to get to research. Because with a clinical
Right.
focused degree, the downside is that a lot of the reviewers at NIH, or this is what I've been told, don't understand necessarily what those clinical doctorates are, the DPT and the OTD. And so they don't view those favorably or as trained to do research. So there are some additional things that you can do. I do know some people with OTDs that have gone on to do like postdocs to get additional research training, or have done an OTD and an MSCI, and that has worked for a path to research. You don't always need a PhD is the short version, but we'll continue that conversation. And also you can email us anytime and we could connect you with other people that have gone on to research careers without a PhD, if that's what you'd like, if you'd like to be connected with those types of people.
Sure. Yeah. Great. Thank you so much for answering.
I'll put me and Dr. Harris's, or maybe all three of us can just put our things in the chat. But related to money, if you are unaware, like a lot of PhD programs, some of them cost money, but many of them provide a stipend. At WashU, when I was a student, it was a little bit over 24,000, and your student loans go on pause while you're a student. So I don't want, it is a decision and a commitment, because I know that OTD isn't cheap.
There's also, I will say, because I had debt for my master's at Northwestern, actually. And after my PhD, I did, there are loan repayment options. They're competitive and they're not easy to get, but I got one. And, I didn't know what I was going to do with my debt after the fact. And so, there is funding that will repay some of that debt. So like NIH is repaying my student loans.
Competitive though.
It is competitive. It is competitive, and I'll tell you, I applied more than once, but and I was fine with that. Like, that's okay. Tell me what to fix, and I'll come back, make it better. So, I mean, there are other options. And that's not the only one. I think they're, clinically working in various areas and things like that. There are alternatives also.
I think that's something we have to or think about how we adjust so that people can access research careers, though, because of this cost burden. I had the opportunity and the financial ability to do that, but I think, there's other considerations. Like if you have kids, if you have another income. At that time, I was married and had a husband who was bringing in enough money so that we could pay our rent and eat. And I couldn't have done it by myself, to be honest, financially.
Eating
And
is
I think
important.
that's so important. And you were just bringing up diversity and, how do we get people that would have an economic challenge to get into PhD programs? That's kind of, even me, that's where I'm at. I've got $250,000 worth of student loan debt from my DPT. It just keeps climbing because I'm doing income-based repayment, and that's the biggest question for me. And as the primary breadwinner, that's another issue too, but yeah, I'm just trying to think about how you can get a diverse group of people in PhD programs and doing research, but when the cost, like getting or letting go of your clinical salary, that is scary to me. It's like a third. The stipend would be a third of what I'm making right now. So that's
Right?
yeah. So
And
I'm
it's
like,
not just the salary. So the other thing that I've told students is it's not
yeah,
just
benefits too,
salary.
right?
It's
Yeah.
the benefits, it's the, the retirement, the health insurance, it's the
Mhm.
years of not making that salary.
Right.
It's a commitment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's just something for the research community to definitely think about too. With how we're helping people become researchers and PhD candidates, those kind of things. I don't. Yeah.
Well, I thank all of you all for
Mhm.
attending. And so I don't want to cut you off. We do want to kind of formally stop the recording, but we're going to hang out. We can stay on for a little bit. So if there are additional questions, but thank you for joining us and engaging. You guys have great questions. So this is wonderful. We threw our emails in the chat. So feel free to email us with other questions as well as they come up. Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Nardos, for being our guest today. We appreciate it. It's wonderful. So we're just going to end the recording, but